Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. Today, as you probably know from the title, I am going to be telling you about the books I read in June, a little bit in May, but mostly June, so like a winter reading wrap up, if you will. And spoiler alert, this whole video is just one big love letter to Joe Abercrombie. So this reading season, like the June season, the books I read were sensational. However, there is one book that I am so angry and so triggered by, and I feel like it's going to be really controversial, and BookTok girlies, please do not come for me. I'm sorry, but more on that later. So, the first book we're going to talk about today is, if I can get it, you might know what this is. I've spoken about it a lot. So the first book I read is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This was the beginning of a huge hiatus I went on because I loved this book. It was so good. I gave this 4 stars out of 5 stars, and The Blade Itself is not what I was expecting. It was just so much more than I thought it would be, and there's so many layers to this. I would love to read it again and just see all the different things that I'd missed. So in The Blade Itself, we have 4 main characters that we follow in different, point of views that we switch between, and we're not really sure how, when, and if they're going to intersect. And they do, spoiler alert at the end. And this whole book is just showing the corruption and the sliminess of the government that is ruling over the main country that we're in for this book. And there's war, there's scheming, there's lying, there's plotting, there's torture, there's love. It is so good. Not what I was expecting, but it was so much more. And this is the first book in a trilogy called the First Law Trilogy, which is actually set in a huge world that has been written. There's 9 books in total in this universe, and this is book 1. This is where it starts. Now, I made my dad read this. He loved it. I am just making everybody read this book. It is so good. The writing style is amazing. This book is funny. The humor is so dry and so intentional that I laughed out loud while reading this. I was cackling up a storm. So, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. Do yourself a favor and read this immediately. Now, after reading that, can you guess what the next book I read was? Yes! It was Before They're Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is book 2 in the First Law Trilogy. It picks up right where you left off in book 1, which I always really like when reading a series. Now, this book is also hilarious, also really dark. It was just such a blast to read. I gave this 5 stars. It was amazing. And it's a middle book. Usually a middle book in a trilogy is kind of like a drag, but no, this was so good. There was just so much action. You were learning more and more about the characters, and it was just so satisfying to see more about them and seeing how they're developing, and I really liked that. It was really chaotic though. There was a lot happening, and I didn't quite know which characters to root for because some of them don't like each other. Some of them are trying to bring down the other ones, and they're on opposite sides, and you're like, who do I go for? I like all of them. And it's just so thrilling because you don't know who's going to die because all the characters are expendable, which I found to be so thrilling. Which is why the next book I read was The Last Argument of Kings. Now, if you hadn't realized, I was reading these books on my Kindle. I don't have a copy of the physical books, but that's okay. So The Last Argument of Kings is the 3rd book in the First Law Trilogy, and it sort of concludes the narrative that underpins those first 3 books. Where do I begin with The Last Argument of Kings? It is just... See, I'm so lost for words because it was so good. I gave it 5 stars, obviously. The Last Argument of Kings is just cracked. It's so insane. What you think is going to happen doesn't happen, but then there's so many more layers of what you weren't expecting surrounding that plot twist that you're bamboozled by the end of it. I had so much fun. It was great. We're still following our main characters. We've got a couple more side characters, and we're really starting to see all of the netting and the webbing that was laid out in book 1 and 2 is just closing in, and everything is starting to make sense, and things are happening, and you're like screaming at the pages, like, it was so good. It was so good. So the last Argument of Kings was amazing. So the next book that I read is also in the First Law universe. So it's not in the First Law trilogy, but chronologically it occurs about 4 or 5 years after we finished the last Argument of Kings. And that book is Best Served Cold. Now, again, I read this on my Kindle. I zoomed through this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was really fun. So in Best Served Cold, we actually move away from the country that the first trilogy was set in, and we move into like a place called Styria, which is so wild and just cold and angry and so different to the universe that we had become familiar, to the country we had become familiar with in book 1 and 2 and 3. So we have new characters in Best Served Cold. We have a new plot. It is just insane how things and choices from the first trilogy sort of created this butterfly effect in the 4th book, Best Served Cold. And it was just frustrating, but also so satisfying to know that the actions had consequences. So that's all I'm going to say. And kind of controversial. I really don't like the main, I wouldn't call them a protagonist because they're kind of the antagonist, but they're also the main character. I didn't like the main character in Best Served Cold. They were just irritating, and I think that was the point. I think they were supposed to be like a dislikable, you know what? We're gonna lean back like we're in a little podcast together because that's so much comfier. Yes, I was saying I didn't really like the main character, but that was the point. And I didn't really like the plot of the book, but that was the point. Like, it was supposed to be uncomfortable. It was supposed to be gritty. It was supposed to be dark. And boy, oh boy, it was dark. It was so dark. But again, it was hilarious. I was laughing. I remember I was on campus with my best friend reading this. Like, we were having a little reading date together. And I was like cackling, and I was like reading sentences out, and I was like, dude, this is so funny. And it was just so funny. Like, the book was just so funny. But yes, Best Served Cold. I will shut up about that because we are moving into dark territory here. We are moving into uncharted waters, if you will. Let's just take a moment of silence for the next book that I read. We're not really going to talk about it ever again after we talk about it right now because it was truly a lapse in my judgment reading this book. Okay. You're already going to know this probably from the thumbnail of the video, but the next book I read was Wild Love by Elsie Silver. Okay. I didn't actually finish this book. I got 61% of the way through on my Kindle and I could not continue. I had to put it down because it was going so badly and I just didn't want to waste my time reading that last 39%. So let's talk about it. Wild Love is a small town country western romance book. I don't know, I've never read an Elsie Silver book before, but that, to my understanding, is the genre. So in Wild Love, we follow 2 main characters, Rosie and Ford, like the car, Ford. And Ford is the world's hottest billionaire, and he's trying to open his own recording studio in the small town of, I can't remember its name, so we're just going to call it Kingaroy. If you know, you know. So in the small town of Kingaroy, and he's a nepotism baby. His dad is also rich and famous in like the music world. So he's trying to like do his own thing and like branch away from the nepotism of his father. So in comes Rosie, right? Rosie she's like girl boss, like really irritating, like girl boss. She went big in like the city and she had everything. She had the job, she had the partner, and it all comes crashing down because something really horrible happens to her at her day job. So she basically like breaks up with her boyfriend, moves to Kingaroy, which is actually where she grew up. And spoiler alert, she knows West. His name's not West, his name's Ford. She knows Ford. They were childhood friends. It's her older brother's best friend. So the trope is like forbidden love, older man, weirdness. That's all I can tell you because there is actually no plot to this book. That's it. Like, she moves to Kingaroy and she sees Ford and they remember each other and they rekindle, and he hires her to like be a personal assistant in like the development of his recording studio. And that's it. There's a child at some point. This random 12-year-old rocks up and she's there. No one questions it, you know, there's no critical thinking involved in this process. So they have like a little family going on, and it's just horrible. There is no communication, there is no character development, there is no critical thinking, there is no plot. It is just pages and pages and pages of their internal monologues, pining and whining for each other and not doing anything about it, and just behaving in a way that 35-year-olds would not be behaving in the real world. So that's all I'm going to say. 1 star, couldn't finish it. Let's move on. The next book that I tried to read it, I didn't finish it. The next book is The Housekeepers by Alex May. Now, you might recognize this from my thrifting video. If you watched that, I will link it up here because I know how to do that now. So The Housekeepers, spoiler alert again, I didn't finish this book. I tried to read it. I got to page like 50 or 60 and I just gave up, which is really disappointing because the premise of this book sounded so interesting. On the back, it says it's like Ocean's 8, and I liked Ocean's 8, but I didn't like this book. It was boring. There was too much left unsaid that I'm assuming would be revealed later on in the book, but it just was so lacking in context that it was like whiplash. Sorry, I'm so sorry. It was like whiplash trying to keep up with what was happening in the book. So basically, The Housekeepers is the main character. I can't even remember her name. Mrs. King. Mrs. King gets dismissed from working in the household in Mayfair that she was working in, and she wants to get revenge because she feels like her termination was unjust. So she hits up a bunch of old acquaintances, I guess. They're all criminals. She hits up a bunch of old acquaintances and says, basically, I'm going to rob the entire household and I need you to help me. I need a whole team. She puts together a team. But what really irritated me is that there was no explanation as to how she knew all these people and like how these people became these people, because they were all just like 5-star criminals. What? Anyway, I couldn't finish it. It was just really boring. The dialogue was really dry. The characters had no context to them. They were just introduced like bam, 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 bam. I can't click. They were just introduced like one by one by one by one, and there was no time to like warm up to them or to like learn about them. They were just shoved in and it was really intense. So I didn't finish this. My mum's gonna read it. I think she would like it. So she can tell me if it gets better. Hopefully it does. Anyway, moving on. The last book that I read and that we're going to talk about is, you can probably guess. Yes! Oh my gosh, it is Joe Abercrombie. Yay! The last book I read was The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. Now, I stayed up till 11:30 last night finishing this just so I could talk to you about it today. So, this was a 4 out of 5 star read for me, which was probably a little bit generous. I would probably give it like 3.7, 3.5 stars. It was still good. I just found that the beginning was a little bit slow and like a little bit boring, maybe. Maybe I just wasn't reading it in the right frame of mind. Maybe I have been like binging too much of this series. I don't know. But it was still good. So in this book, we are following some characters from the first Law Trilogy. Lots and lots of familiar names, familiar characters. We recognize them, we know them. Except in this book, they went crazy and decided to declare war upon the entire Union. So, don't know what's up with that. We don't get told really why they decided to go to war, but they're at war. So, this book takes place over 3 days, and the whole 3 days is just on the battlefield, showing all the different aspects and all the different angles of war. We're switching between the two sides. We're liking characters from both sides. So it's really intense because you don't want your favorite characters to die, but they probably will because they're fighting the other favorite characters. So it's like, who do I root for? Which seems to be a really favorite trope of Joe Abercrombie's. He does that a lot. And it gets really intense, you know. It's just, but again, it was really funny. It had so many funny moments. It had less sad moments than the previous series, and that might have been because I wasn't as attached to the narrative of this book as I was with the other books. But I'm glad I read it. I could see how it was setting up for future books, and there was just the presence of this one character who seems to have his fingers in all the pies, and it was just like, yep, of course you're here. So The Heroes was still really enjoyable, and I will be continuing the series. The next book is book 6, and that is Red Country, The Red Country. So we're going to read that next. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed listening to me yap about the books I've been reading. Hopefully you have read some of these. If you have, please comment down below and we can talk about them, because surely I'm not alone in my opinion of Wild Love by Elsie Silver. Maybe it's just the whiplash of reading dark, grim fantasy to fluffy Western romance. Maybe that was too much of a pipeline, and maybe it isn't a pipeline, and that's why it didn't go well. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon in the next video. Bye!